My name is Natalie Parker. I am 33 years old, and for the past 3 years, I have been living in a small rented apartment most people would call a mistake. The paint is chipped, the blinds crooked, and every time the ceiling fan rattles above me, I remind myself I could leave at any moment. But I stayed. I wanted to see what my family truly thought of me when they believed I had nothing. Last month, I walked into my mother's 60th birthday at a grand hotel in Miami. My younger sister Melissa, the golden child, stood in her designer dress and laughed in front of everyone still living in that rat hole. The table roared, my parents looked away, and I sat there smiling, though my heart burned. They thought I was stuck. They had no idea what I was preparing. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated so deeply that the only answer was to rewrite the entire story of your life? That night, I returned to the apartment I had called home for 3 years, a place that looked small and forgotten too. Everyone else but still held the beginning of my story. I woke up to the sound of the ceiling fan rattling above me, a tired rhythm I had grown used to in this apartment. The paint on the walls was chipped, the blinds bent from years of careless hands, and the carpet had long lost any color it might have had. I was 33 years old, living in a place most people would pass by without a second glance. To the world, it looked like I had failed. To me, it was a choice. 3 years earlier, I had walked away from a marriage that was supposed to last forever. Ethan Ross, a businessman in real estate, had been charming and relentless in his work. For a while, I thought I was building a future beside him, but his hunger for deals and the people that came with them left little room for me. When the divorce papers were signed, he handed me a portfolio worth $3.2 million. Condos, stocks, and cash tied up neatly in a settlement. He said it was the least he could do, as if money could stitch the gaps in our years together. I had taken it not because I wanted his guilt, but because I knew it would give me freedom. No one in my family knew. To them, I was the daughter who lived in a shoebox apartment, too stubborn to leave Miami, too quiet to fight for a bigger slice of life. My younger sister Melissa had become the star, a 29-year-old designer who loved posting photos of penthouses she decorated and rooftop parties she attended. My parents, Charles and Linda, looked at her as if she had hung the moon. And me, their firstborn, was the shadow in the corner. I leaned against the kitchen counter that morning, staring at the pile of mail I had picked up the night before. Most of it was bills, coupons, nothing worth my time. But one envelope stood out, cream-colored with a gold seal pressed into the flap. My chest tightened as I slid my finger under the edge and opened it. The handwriting was elegant, my mother's, and inside was a formal invitation. Linda Parker's 60th birthday celebration. The Fontanelle Hotel, downtown Miami. Cocktail attire. Saturday evening at 7. I traced the letters with my thumb, my stomach turning. I hadn't been to a family gathering in months. The last one ended with Melissa making a joke about my apartment and my father laughing louder than anyone else. I had smiled, pretending it didn't matter, but the sting had followed me home like a shadow. I set the invitation down on the counter and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with traffic, the heat rising off the asphalt. My neighbor across the hall was yelling again, some argument spilling into the open air. I closed my eyes. This was the life my family believed I had settled for, and in their silence they had confirmed it. I thought about ignoring the invitation, about letting the evening pass without me. Linda would be disappointed, of course, and Charles would call to remind me that family meant showing up. But I also knew what would happen if I did go. Melissa in some designer dress, flashing her smile, reminding everyone that she was the daughter who had made it. My parents beaming with pride while they glanced at me as if I was an afterthought. I pulled open my closet door, the hinges squeaking. Inside hung a small collection of clothes, simple blouses, slacks, and 2 dresses I had kept for years. My hand hovered over a navy dress, knee-length, plain but clean. I took it out and laid it on the bed, smoothing the fabric with my palm. It was nothing special, but it was mine. Sitting at the edge of the mattress, I thought of Ethan. His voice still echoed sometimes, reminding me that I was too proud, too unwilling to rely on anyone. Maybe he was right. I had worked through the wreckage after him, piecing myself back together in silence. The money he left me was untouched except for small adjustments in investments. I had lived as if I had nothing waiting, testing, watching who would stand by me if I had no wealth to offer. My parents had failed that test long ago. Melissa had never even tried. Still, I folded the invitation and slipped it into my purse. That night, I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the couch scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one of Ethan and me in Key Biscayne, our smiles bright against the ocean breeze. For a second, I wondered what my life might have looked like if we had held on. But the thought passed quickly. I had built something stronger on my own, even if no one could see it yet. The clock ticked toward midnight. I turned off the lights, the apartment sinking into darkness. Tomorrow, I would stand in a room filled with people who thought they knew who I was. I would walk in wearing that navy dress, my head held high, carrying a secret they could never imagine. I lay down, the ceiling fan rattling above me once more, my heart steadying itself for the night ahead. Morning light spilled through the crooked blinds, and I woke with the same tight knot in my stomach. By evening, I would be standing in a room filled with people who had already made up their minds about me. I took my time getting ready, smoothing down the navy dress I had chosen, brushing my hair into something simple but neat. The mirror did not flatter me, the light was harsh, but I forced myself to meet my own eyes. No one else was going to give me the confidence I needed tonight. By the time I reached the Fontanelle Hotel downtown, the sun was beginning to sink and the air clung heavy against my skin. Valet in crisp uniforms opened doors for luxury cars, pulling up one after another. I stepped out of the cab I had taken, clutching my small purse, and tried not to notice the difference. Inside, the lobby glowed with chandeliers, polished marble, and the hum of well-dressed guests greeting each other. I gave my name at the desk and was guided toward the ballroom. The doors opened to a rush of sound and light. Crystal glasses clinked, waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and clusters of people in cocktail attire laughed easily. My mother stood near the center, wearing a sparkling silver gown, her blonde hair set perfectly. She looked younger than 60, smiling graciously at every compliment. My father hovered at her side, proud and attentive, shaking hands and patting shoulders. I stayed near the edge, giving myself a moment to breathe. It was easy to spot Melissa even from across the room. She wore emerald green satin cut to draw every eye, and she thrived on it. People circled her like moths around a flame, and she leaned into every compliment, her laughter carrying over the music. I had not even spoken to her yet, but already I felt the familiar weight of being compared. When my mother saw me, she gave a quick smile and reached out to kiss my cheek. "You made it, Natalie," she said softly before moving on to greet another guest. My father squeezed my arm in greeting, his eyes already elsewhere. Neither lingered, and I told myself not to care. I found a seat at one of the tables and folded my hands in my lap. Dinner was served soon after, waiters lifting silver lids to reveal dishes too carefully arranged to look filling. The room filled with chatter, forks against plates, and the occasional clink of glass for a toast. Melissa sat 2 seats down from me, glowing with attention. A cousin asked about her latest project, and she launched into a story about designing a penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay. Her words sparkled, and everyone leaned in to hear more. I tried to eat quietly, focusing on the salmon in front of me, but it was impossible to ignore her voice. She loved the stage, and tonight she had it. When the laughter around her grew louder, she turned her eyes on me with a smile that was sharp rather than kind. "Still living in that rat hole, Natalie," she said, her voice pitched just enough for nearby tables to hear. The words landed like a slap, and the pause that followed was almost worse. For a second, I thought maybe someone would step in, my mother, my father, anyone. But then a chuckle came from the other end of the table, followed by another, until it spread like ripples on water. A few guests laughed outright. Some tried to smother their smiles behind napkins, and others simply looked down at their plates. I kept my eyes on my fork, my hand gripping it so tightly I could feel the metal bite into my skin. Heat rushed to my face, but I said nothing. Melissa tilted her head as if waiting for me to answer, then let out a laugh and turned back to her admirers. The conversation moved on as though I had never been there. My mother sipped her wine without a word. My father cleared his throat and asked about the dessert menu, and I sat frozen, my chest burning. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never surface again. I had been mocked before, but never like this, never with a room full of witnesses joining in. The clinking of glasses grew louder, someone made another toast, and the room filled again with the sound of celebration. But all I heard was Melissa's voice echoing in my ears. All I saw was the way people's faces had lit up at my expense. I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe evenly. If I spoke, if I lashed out, they would twist it into another story about my bitterness. So I sat still silent, letting the humiliation wash over me. In that moment, it became clear. In their eyes, I was not just the daughter who had taken a quieter path, not just the one who lived differently. I was an afterthought, a target, a reminder of what not to be. I pressed my napkin to my lips and closed my eyes for the briefest second, steadying myself. The music swelled, the laughter rose again, and I sat in the middle of it all, invisible and exposed at the same time. When the dinner ended and the guests began drifting toward the lobby, I slipped out as quietly as I could. My heels clicked against the marble floors, my dress clinging uncomfortably to my skin as though it carried the weight of every laugh that had cut into me. Outside, the Miami night was warm and restless. I waved down a cab and let myself sink into the backseat, staring out the window as the hotel lights faded behind me. Back in my apartment, the silence hit harder than the noise of the ballroom. I set my purse on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and poured myself a glass of water. I told myself to let it go, that the night was over, but the words kept replaying, still living in that rat hole. The way Melissa had smirked, the way strangers had laughed, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to mock me. I pulled out my phone, almost against my better judgment. Notifications stacked across the screen, buzzing every few seconds. Melissa had posted a photo on Instagram, a picture of her leaning across the table in her emerald gown, champagne glass raised, her smile wide and triumphant. Beside her was a blurred glimpse of me in the background, head lowered, caught mid-breath. The caption read, "Some things never change. Still stuck where they've always been." Within minutes, the comments had piled up. Friends of hers, cousins, even people I barely knew. Laughing emojis, little digs disguised as jokes, and worst of all, silence from those who might have defended me. I scrolled until my chest felt tight. One comment caught my eye and stayed there like a bruise. A former coworker from the marketing firm where I had spent 4 years wrote she never did manage to buy a house. Guess some things are just permanent. I could almost hear his voice, casual and dismissive, as though he had been waiting for this moment to confirm what he already believed. I set the phone down, then picked it up again, scrolling, punishing myself with each word. People speculating about why I still rented, making guesses about failed jobs, failed choices. A few strangers chimed in just to join the mockery. It felt like the humiliation from the ballroom had spilled into every corner of my life, dragging me out into the open where anyone could take aim. I wanted to respond, to fire back with something cutting, to remind them that they knew nothing about me. But what good would it do? If I defended myself, it would only feed their story. If I stayed silent, I remained their punchline. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rattle of the ceiling fan. I sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the chipped paint on the wall, and felt the ache settle deeper. I had thought I could endure one night of cruelty, but now it had spread further, turning into something I could not contain. Hours passed, and I found myself pacing, replaying every moment, every look that had passed between my parents when Melissa mocked me. The way they chose not to stop it, the way they let it hang in the air as though I deserved it. I checked my phone one more time, hoping the comments had slowed, but they hadn't. Melissa had added another story, this one of the cake being wheeled in her arm, linked with my mother's, the caption reading, "Celebrating with the people who matter most." I was nowhere to be seen. The message was clear. I was not part of their circle, not part of their pride, not part of their story. I turned off the phone and placed it face down. For a moment, I sat completely still, my heart pounding with something sharper than shame. It was anger, steady and rising, the kind that cleared the fog and left only resolve. They wanted me small, quiet, forgettable. They wanted to define me by an apartment, a paycheck, a chair at the edge of the table. They wanted me to stay in the shadows while Melissa shined. I stood at the window, looking out at the city lights flickering against the dark water of Biscayne Bay. Cars moved below like veins of fire, and the sound of the ocean lingered in the distance. I thought about the money sitting in my account untouched waiting. I thought about the years I had told myself to be cautious, to wait for the right time. Maybe the right time was now. I pressed my hand against the glass, cool against my skin, and felt the shift inside me. I would not answer their mockery with words. I would not fight them online or try to win their approval. Instead, I would make choices they could not dismiss. The laughter at that dinner, the comments on that post, the silence of my parents had carved the decision clean and sharp. I would never allow Melissa or anyone else to look at me the same way again. When I finally turned away from the window, the night felt different. Heavy still, but no longer crushing. I poured myself another glass of water and sat at the table once more, calmer now. For the first time in years, the humiliation had done more than wound me. It had lit something that would not go out. I folded my hands and whispered to myself, never again. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in years. The heaviness of the night before was still there, but it had changed into something sharper, something I could use. I dressed simply, pulled my hair back into a loose ponytail, and walked down the street to a small cafe that overlooked the bay. Diane was already there, sitting at a corner table with her laptop open and a steaming mug of coffee in front of her. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, though her eyes searched my face as if she already knew I carried more than I let on. I slid into the chair across from her, wrapping my hands around the cup the barista set down for me, and let the warmth seep into my fingers. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said gently. "Not much," I admitted, staring out at the water. "Something happened last night, something I can't ignore anymore." Diane tilted her head, her dark hair brushing her shoulder. "What did they do this time?" I told her. Not just the dinner, not just Melissa's words echoing across the ballroom, but the way it had followed me home, multiplied on social media, turned into a chorus of strangers mocking me. Diane listened without interrupting, her hands folded, her expression tightening with every detail. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. "Nat, I don't know how you've tolerated this for so long." I smiled faintly. "Because I thought I had to. I thought keeping my head down was easier than giving them more to hate." She leaned forward. And now I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I said the words I had never said aloud. "I'm not broke, Diane. I never have been. I've been sitting on $3.2 million since the divorce." For a second, she just blinked at me. Then she set her coffee down a little too hard. "Excuse me," what I nodded. "Ethan wired me the settlement 3 years ago. I never touched it. I put it in investments and savings. It's grown, but I never told anyone. Not my parents, not Melissa, not even you." Diane stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "You've been living in that apartment all this time, letting them think you were scraping by when you had millions." "Yes," I whispered. She sat back, rubbing her forehead as though trying to make sense of it. "Why?" "Because I wanted to know how they would treat me when they thought I had nothing. I wanted to see if their love was unconditional or just based on status." I guess I got my answer last night. For a long moment, we just sat there, the cafe around us filled with the clink of cups and the murmur of other people's lives. Finally, Diane shook her head, a rueful smile tugging at her lips. "You're braver than I thought. Or crazier. Maybe both." Her expression softened. "So what now? You're not the kind of person who tells me something like this unless you've already made a decision." I felt the weight of the moment press against me. I'm done being their punchline. I'm done letting Melissa define me. I'm going to buy a house. Not just any house. A real one. A place that no one can belittle or ignore. Her eyes widened, then brightened. "Finally, I've been waiting for you to say that. Nat, you deserve it. You've always deserved it." The conviction in her voice steadied me. We talked for another hour about neighborhoods and options, about whether I wanted ocean views or something tucked into a quiet street with palm trees swaying in the yard. She mentioned Coral Gables, where the homes were sprawling and private, yet close enough to the city. I could picture its sunlight spilling across white stucco, a garden lush with bougainvillea-wide steps leading to a door that was mine. For the first time, the idea felt possible, not just a dream I shoved away. But with the possibility came the fear. I traced the rim of my cup with my fingertip. What if I buy it and it feels empty? What if I regret it? Diane reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. You won't. Because this isn't just about the house, it's about taking back your story. They've been writing it for you, laughing while they did. It's time you wrote your own. The words sank into me solid and true. We parted outside the cafe, the sun high and bright above us. Diane squeezed my shoulder and promised to help with the legalities once I found the right place. As I walked back toward my apartment, the city looked different. The streets were the same, the air still sticky with salt and heat, but I carried something inside me that hadn't been there before. I unlocked my door, stepped into the cramped space, and looked around with new eyes. The peeling paint, the rattling fan, the narrow windows, all of it had been my shield, a way to test loyalty. But now it felt like chains I no longer needed. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new browser tab. Real estate listings filled the screen, photographs of grand foyers and sweeping staircases, pools glittering under the Florida sun. My chest tightened, not with doubt this time, but with anticipation. Page after page, I clicked through the possibilities. Some houses looked too perfect, like they belonged in magazines, but not in a life I could touch. Others felt almost right, but not quite. Then I saw it. A mansion in Coral Gables, white walls, gleaming palm trees curving gracefully around a driveway that looked like it belonged in another world. The price tag read $2.5 million. Paid in cash, it could be mine without hesitation. I stared at the photo until it blurred, until the image became less about the house and more about the statement it carried. I closed the laptop slowly, my heart steady now. The decision was no longer a possibility. It was a plan. The next morning I called Diane first and told her I was ready. She gave me the name of a real estate agent she trusted, a woman named Karen Walsh, who had been in the Miami market for over 15 years. Within an hour, Karen called me herself, her voice brisk yet warm, and we set up a meeting at her office downtown. She greeted me in a fitted blazer and heels that clicked confidently against the marble floor. Her handshake was firm, her smile practiced but not cold. She led me to a conference room with wide windows that looked out over Biscayne Bay. On the table were neatly stacked folders and her tablet already queued up with listings. So Natalie, she began, sliding into her chair, Diane, tells me you're interested in something substantial. A waterfront property, yes. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes. I want something private. Spacious. Not too far from the city, but far enough that I can breathe. Karen tapped on her screen, her eyes scanning. That narrows it. There are a few neighborhoods we should focus on: Key Biscayne, Coconut Grove, and Coral Gables. Each has its own character. Let's start by seeing what speaks to you. The next few days blurred into a carousel of polished floors, sparkling pools, and manicured lawns. Karen drove me from one gated entrance to another, her car humming as she rattled off square footage, listing prices, and histories of owners I had never heard of. I tried to picture myself in each place, standing in the gleaming kitchens or staring out over the water, but something always felt off. One house was too ostentatious, every corner screaming for attention. Another was beautiful but pressed too close against neighbors, the kind of place where gossip traveled faster than the tide. After the fifth showing, I felt my resolve falter. Karen glanced at me as we drove back toward her office. You're quiet, I exhaled. They're all gorgeous, but none of them feel like mine. Like home. Her lips curved slightly. That's exactly the right way to think about it. Don't worry. The right house will find you. 2 days later, her call came. I was sipping coffee at my small kitchen table when the phone rang. Natalie, she said, her voice brisk with excitement. I think I found it. New on the market this week. A property in Coral Gables, right on the water. Contemporary design, private dock, infinity pool. Asking $2.5 million. If you can come today, I'll take you. My pulse quickened. I'll be ready in an hour. The drive out to Coral Gables felt longer than it was. My palms rested against my knees as the streets changed from crowded city blocks to wide avenues shaded by banyan trees. When we pulled into the driveway of the house, I stopped breathing for a moment. The mansion stood proud against the sun, its white stucco walls, gleaming windows tall and reflective like quiet eyes watching the water. A curved driveway led up to double doors of dark wood framed by bougainvillea in full bloom. Beyond the house, I glimpsed blue water shimmering the edge of a dock stretching out like an invitation. Karen's smile widened as she turned off the car. "Shall we?" Inside, the house opened into a soaring foyer with a chandelier that seemed to catch every angle of light. The living room spilled into wide glass doors that folded open to reveal the pool turquoise and endless meeting the ocean horizon. I walked slowly, my shoes clicking against marble floors, my reflection caught in the glass. I touched the smooth counter of the kitchen, ran my fingers along the polished banister of the staircase, and paused at the balcony upstairs. The breeze rolled in warm and salty, carrying the sound of gulls and the faint hum of a boat engine somewhere in the distance. I closed my eyes, and for the first time I could imagine it. Coffee in the mornings on the terrace, evenings spent watching the sunset melt into the ocean, silence that was mine and mine alone. No voices mocking me, no family waiting to remind me I was less. Karen joined me at the balcony, her eyes sharp. "It speaks to you, doesn't it?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, this is the one." She didn't waste time. "The seller is motivated, but the price is firm. 2.5 million. I turned to face her fully, my decision already solid. "I'll pay in cash." For once, Karen looked surprised. She studied me as though recalibrating everything she thought she knew. Then she nodded, professional mask sliding back in place. "I'll have the paperwork ready this afternoon." The rest of the day passed in a blur of signatures and phone calls. Diane came by Karen's office briefly to review the documents, her face breaking into a grin when she saw how serious I was. The numbers rolled through my head but carried no weight. 3.2 million had been sitting untouched, frozen in accounts like a secret I had carried too long. Now it was transforming into walls, windows, gardens, and freedom. That evening I drove back to my apartment, the keys to my new life resting in an envelope on the passenger seat. I parked, climbed the narrow stairs to the place I had called home, and opened the door one last time. The fan rattled overhead as it always had, the walls still thin, the air still stifling. But none of it mattered anymore. I set the envelope gently on the table and let my eyes roam the room. Tomorrow this would no longer be the measure of who I was. I had stepped beyond it. I had a house that reflected not their version of me but mine. The next morning I woke with sunlight slipping through the blinds, sharp and golden, the kind of light that made even my old apartment seem warmer. I showered, dressed simply, and drove toward Coral Gables, first to stand in front of the house that was now mine. I didn't go inside, not yet. I only stood at the edge of the driveway, the bougainvillea framing the gates, and whispered to myself that this was the beginning of something new. Then I turned back toward Miami with a different kind of purpose. For years I had hidden behind plain jeans and faded sweaters, pulling my hair into a bun like I wanted to disappear. That morning I walked into a salon on Miracle Mile, a place I had passed 100 times but never dared to enter. The air inside smelled of hairspray and citrus shampoo, and women in sleek chairs flipped through glossy magazines as stylists with confident hands shaped their hair into something brighter. A young woman with sharp eyeliner and soft curls at her shoulders greeted me. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, a little breathless, "but I need a change." She studied me for a moment, then smiled. "We can make that happen. I'm Jessica. Come sit." I sat in her chair, the cape draped over me like armor, and watched my reflection under the harsh lights. My hair, long and dull from years of neglect, hung limp around my shoulders. Jessica stood behind me, hands poised. "What are you thinking?" she asked. I looked at myself and answered without hesitation. "Shorter. Layers. Highlights, something lighter. I don't want to look like I'm hiding anymore." Her smile widened. "Perfect. Trust me." The scissors moved, locks fell, and the sound felt like pieces of the old me hitting the floor. Strands of dark hair gathered around the chair as Jessica worked with careful precision, weaving caramel highlights through what remained. She angled the layers so my face looked sharper, lifted, alive. When she spun me toward the mirror at last, I almost didn't recognize myself. My eyes looked brighter, my cheekbones higher, and the woman staring back carried something I thought I had lost a spark. Jessica touched my shoulder lightly. You look powerful. I left the salon with the smell of fresh color in my hair and walked into the afternoon sun like I was stepping onto a stage. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to lower my gaze when people looked at me. The next day, I drove to South Beach. I told myself I only needed a few things, but once I stepped inside the boutiques lining Collins Avenue, I knew this was more than shopping. It was reinvention. I touched silk blouses that draped like water, tried on tailored blazers that gave me sharp lines, and presents slipped into dresses that held my waist, as if reminding me I still had one. A saleswoman with bright lipstick brought me a pair of heels, sleek and nude. When I stepped out of the fitting room, she clapped her hands softly. You look like you run your own company. The words hit me with a force I hadn't expected. I turned toward the mirror, the blazer fitting perfectly, the heels lengthening my stride. For years, Melissa had been the one who owned the spotlight, who walked into a room and drew eyes without effort. Now, for the first time, I didn't feel like her shadow. I carried the bags back to my car, setting them gently in the passenger seat. Each piece felt like a brick laid in the foundation of someone new. That night back at the apartment, I pulled the tags off and tried everything again one by one. I stood in front of the mirror, turning slowly, and let myself smile. My body felt taller, my steps deliberate. The woman I saw could walk into a crowded room and not shrink. The next morning, I tested it. I dressed in one of the new blouses, paired it with slacks that hugged me just right, and walked into a small cafe near Brickell for breakfast. The barista looked up as I ordered and gave me a compliment I hadn't heard in years. That color really suits you. I thanked him, carried my coffee to a table by the window, and sat straighter than usual. A couple at the next table glanced over, and instead of looking away, I met their eyes and smiled. They smiled back. It was a small thing, but it was everything. By the end of the week, I had a new routine. Mornings were spent driving by my new house, afternoons exploring boutiques, or sitting with Diane to finalize details, evenings walking the beach in clothes that made me feel like the tide itself couldn't push me back. The old Natalie, the one who slouched and whispered and wore thrift store jeans until the fabric thinned, was fading. In her place stood someone who had cut away the weight of shame layer by layer until confidence shone through like the highlights in my hair. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror dressed in a black dress that hugged my body just enough, my new hair catching the glow of the lamp. I straightened the neckline, slipped the heels onto my feet, and took a step back. The reflection waiting for me didn't look like someone clinging to survival. She looked like someone stepping into a life she chose. I picked up my phone, glanced once at Melissa's latest post flashing across the screen, and, instead of flinching, I turned it off. My image in the mirror mattered more. I lifted my chin and whispered, not as a plea but as a promise, this is who I am now. I called Diane the next morning and asked if she could meet me at a cafe near the bay. She arrived with her usual neat stack of folders tucked under her arm, and that sharp expression that made everyone in the room notice her. We sat by the window where the water glimmered, and for a while we just sipped our coffee in silence. Then I laid my plan out on the table between us. I don't want this house to just be mine, I said quietly. I want it to mean something bigger. I want to turn it into a place where women can gather, learn, and feel safe. A hub, a resource center. Empower Women Hub. That's what I want written into my will. If anything ever happens to me, the house and everything I own should belong to it. Diane set down her cup and studied me. Her lawyer's face didn't reveal much at first, but then her mouth softened into a smile. Natalie, that is bold. It's not just generous, it's legacy. But you know it's going to stir things up. I'm ready, I answered. I've been silent too long. She opened her folder, flipping through papers already outlining the process. We can amend your will. And we'll need to form a non-profit structure if you want it to have lasting power. There will be paperwork, boards, bylaws, tax implications. Are you sure you're ready for all of it? I nodded. Yes. I need this. Within days, the legal drafts were moving forward. Diane was efficient, precise, and she walked me through every line. Signing those first documents gave me a thrill that went deeper than buying the mansion. The house was mine, but now it would hold a purpose greater than me. Word spread quickly in Coral Gables. Wealthy neighbors who had waved politely when I first moved in began sending letters, then complaints. One afternoon, Karen Walsh, my realtor, called with a warning. "They've started a petition, Natalie. They think a community hub will lower property values." I laughed bitterly into the phone. Of course they do. A week later, I received notice from the city. A hearing would be scheduled before the council to review my proposal and the objections. I sat in Diane's office with the letter in my lap, my stomach twisting. "You don't have to back down," Diane told me firmly. "You're within your rights. But they'll be loud. They'll try to intimidate you. Then I'll be louder," I said, though my voice shook. The night before the hearing, I walked through the empty mansion, imagining what it would look like filled with life. I saw women sitting in circles sharing stories. I saw young girls learning skills at long wooden tables. I saw laughter echoing off the high ceilings where once there had only been silence. I touched the walls and promised them they would not stand for vanity alone. The hearing took place in a municipal building downtown. The room smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, the air heavy with tension. My neighbors filled the front rows in pressed suits and pearl earrings, their arms crossed, their whispers sharp. Diane sat beside me, calm as ever, her notes stacked neatly. When my name was called, I rose. My legs felt heavy, but each step grew steadier as I approached the microphone. I began slowly. 3 years ago, I thought my life had ended. Divorce left me stripped of identity. I lived quietly, small, nearly invisible. But then I realized silence was not survival. It was erasure. This house, this beautiful home, gave me back a sense of dignity. I could have left it at that. I could have hidden inside its walls and lived comfortably. But that is not enough. I want this place to serve others who have been silenced, overlooked, or dismissed. Empower Women Hub will not just be a building, it will be a chance. I heard murmurs, some scoffing, some approving. My neighbors lined up after me with their complaints. They spoke of traffic, of noise, of property values. One woman in a tailored navy dress said I was inviting chaos into their pristine neighborhood. Another man claimed I was exploiting a charitable facade for attention. When it was my turn to respond, I lifted my chin. What you call chaos, I call community. What you fear as noise is actually voices being heard. And if you believe that a home's value is only in its resale price, then you misunderstand what value really means. I bought my house outright. I am not asking for your approval. I am asking for the council to see that this city should stand for more than gates and silence. I felt the heat of their stares, but I kept my gaze steady on the council members. The room went quiet when the chairperson leaned into his microphone. "We have reviewed the legal filings. There is no ordinance barring the use proposed by Ms. Parker, provided she complies with zoning and safety regulations. Unless there is further evidence, the council will move to approve." Time stretched as they voted one by one. Approve. 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 The final tally passed. Relief surged through me, so strong my knees nearly buckled. Diane squeezed my arm, whispering, "You did it." I looked back at the rows of polished faces, their lips tight, their eyes narrowed. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of their disapproval. Their power had limits, and I had just seen it break. When I stepped outside into the Miami heat, the sun hit me full in the face, bright and unflinching. My pulse pounded, but it was not fear anymore. It was triumph. I stood on the courthouse steps and drew in a breath that tasted like salt and possibility. The mansion would not just be mine. It would belong to every woman who needed its walls. No one could take that away now. And for the first time, I felt unstoppable. I sent the invitations out the following week, short and simple, just a request for dinner at my new place in Coral Gables. Melissa texted back almost immediately with a laughing emoji and the words, "Whose mansion are you borrowing now?" My mother called, her voice cautious, asking if I was sure about hosting something so soon. My father said nothing at all, just a curt confirmation that they would come. The evening arrived warm and heavy, with the scent of the ocean drifting through the palms. I had the driveway lights set low and the front door open when their car pulled in. The moment they stepped inside, the air shifted. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest as her eyes traced the vaulted ceilings and the sweeping staircase. My father's mouth tightened, his eyes darting across the marble floors like he was searching for flaws. Melissa walked 2 steps ahead of them, her heels clicking, her face a mix of disbelief and suspicion. "This is something," my mother murmured, her eyes wide as she took in the chandeliers. "Wow, Nat," Melissa said with a smirk. "Did you win the lottery or just find a very generous boyfriend?" I smiled and gestured toward the dining room. "Dinner is ready." The table was set with white linens, silver cutlery, and a centerpiece of fresh orchids. The caterer had left earlier, everything prepared, but I carried the first tray out myself, setting it down with calm precision. My mother touched the stem of her wine glass, as though testing if it was real. "This must cost a fortune to rent," she said, her voice soft but edged with doubt. I took my seat at the head of the table, meeting her eyes directly. "It isn't rented." Melissa let out a short laugh, sharp and dismissive. "Right. So, whose name is actually on the deed? Some investor you're working for?" Or Ethan swooped back into the picture with guilt money. I folded my napkin across my lap and said evenly, "The deed has one name. Mine." The silence that followed was deep and thick. My father shifted in his chair, his jaw clenched. "Natalie, don't insult our intelligence. A house like this in Coral Gables. You couldn't possibly have I paid cash." I interrupted, my voice calm but steady. "Every cent came from my own account." Melissa's fork clattered against her plate. "Cash? You expect us to believe you had millions sitting around while you were living in that dump apartment all these years?" "Yes," I said simply. 3.2 million to be exact. From the divorce. I invested wisely. I chose to live small because I wanted to see how you all treated me when you thought I had nothing. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. My father leaned forward, his hands flat against the table. "That was irresponsible. Hiding money, pretending to be poor. You embarrassed this family. Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" I held his stare. "I know exactly how it made me feel when you laughed at me, when you let Melissa humiliate me in front of an entire dining room. And I also know how it feels to walk into my own house and not need anyone's approval. I don't owe you explanations, but I chose to give you this truth tonight." Melissa's face flushed deep red. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "So what, Nat, you think flashing a mansion suddenly makes you better than everyone else? Newsflash, money doesn't buy class. You'll always be the same girl hiding in the corner." I let her words settle, then leaned slightly forward. "No, Melissa. What I am now is someone who decides what happens to everything I own. I've already had Diane draft my will. None of this will go to you or to anyone in this family." The air went cold. My mother's hand trembled around her wine glass. "Natalie, you don't mean that." "I do," I said. "Everything will go to Empower Women Hub. This house, the accounts, all of it. It will serve women who need a voice, not people who tried to take mine away." My father slammed his palm against the table. The silverware rattled. "You are out of your mind. You would cut out your own blood, your own sister, your parents for strangers." I kept my tone measured. "I would honor those who value me. Blood doesn't excuse cruelty." Melissa stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is insane. You're throwing our family away for some ridiculous project." I looked at her, at the disbelief written across her face, and for once I didn't shrink. "Family is supposed to stand by you, not mock you. You made your choice a long time ago. Tonight I made mine." The room held its breath. My mother whispered my name as though pleading, but no one moved. The clink of the fountain outside the window filled the silence until finally Melissa grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. My father followed, stiffly muttering under his breath, while my mother lingered a moment longer, her eyes wet and bewildered. I rose from my chair, steady and calm. "Thank you for coming. Drive safe." She opened her mouth as though to speak, then closed it again and walked out. When the door shut, the echo rolled through the house. I exhaled slowly and let the quiet settle around me. For the first time, I realized this was not just a house. It was a line drawn, a truth spoken aloud. I walked back to the table and touched the orchids at the center, their petals pale and strong. The night outside was deep and still, and I let it hold me. The phone rang before I had even cleared the dishes. I glanced at the screen and saw Melissa's name flashing. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Her voice shot through the line, sharp and bitter. "You think you can just cut us out and hide behind some charity? You're selfish, Natalie. You always have been. I'm calling my lawyer first thing tomorrow. This mansion, that money, it's not just yours. It belongs to the family." I held the phone steady, my tone even. "It was granted to me in the divorce. It is mine legally, Melissa. No lawyer can change that." She scoffed. "We'll see about that. Do you really want to drag this family's name through court? Dad's heart can't handle the stress. Do you even care if you kill him with your greed?" Before I could respond, I heard my mother's voice faint in the background, then the shuffle of the phone passing. "Natalie," she said softly, almost pleading. "Please don't do this. Your father has been under so much strain. His heart is weaker than he lets on. We're asking you as your parents, think about us before you lock everything away. We are still your family." Her voice cracked, and for a moment a pang of guilt tugged at me. But then Melissa's words cut back in, loud and impatient. "Enough, Mom. Stop begging. She doesn't care about him. She only cares about her little women's club." There was a pause, then Melissa blurted almost too fast. "And what about me? Do you expect me to just let my company sink? I need that money. Do you hear me? I need it, or everything I've built is gone." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother gasped. My father's voice came through, low and furious. "Melissa." But she didn't back down. "What? At least I'm honest. She's sitting on millions while I'm drowning. She could help and chooses not to." I closed my eyes and let the truth settle. It was never about family dinners or Charles's heart or my mother's pleas. It was about Melissa's failing business, about greed dressed up as concern. I spoke calmly. "Thank you for being honest, Melissa. Now it's clear this was never about family. It was about your bank account. You're not asking me to save Dad. You're asking me to save you from your own mistakes." My father's voice erupted, hard and cutting. "Natalie, how dare you speak like that to your sister? She's worked harder than you'll ever understand. You've turned your back on us, on the people who raised you, on the family that made you." I gripped the phone tighter but kept my voice steady. "Family doesn't mock you in public. Family doesn't dismiss your worth until money appears. Family doesn't measure love in dollar signs. If that is what you call family, then I want no part of it." My mother tried again, her voice breaking. "Natalie, please, we can find another way. Just don't shut the door on us completely." I breathed slowly, feeling the weight of years pressing against this moment. "I already told you. Empower Women is my family now. The women who will walk through these doors, who will find safety and strength here, they are my legacy. Not bitterness, not greed." Melissa let out a harsh laugh. "You'll regret this. When you're alone in that big house with no one to visit you, you'll realize what you threw away." I pressed my lips together. I'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded by people who only show up with their hands out. The line went quiet, then my father muttered something about shame and disappointment before the call ended abruptly. I stood in the silent house, the orchids still on the table, the echo of their voices fading. My chest rose and fell, not with regret but with something closer to release. I turned off the dining room lights one by one, the glow of the pool outside casting soft ripples against the glass. For the first time, the house felt less like a fortress and more like a promise. The night carried their anger away, leaving me in a stillness I had earned. Morning sunlight streamed across the kitchen counters as I stirred sugar into my coffee, the quiet hum of the pool filter outside the only sound. My phone buzzed against the marble island. Diane's name appeared, and when I answered, her voice was sharp with the kind of urgency that carried both disbelief and satisfaction. "You'll want to see this," she said. "Check the Herald. It's about Melissa." I set the mug down and pulled up the article. There she was, her face in a tight shot outside her office, jaw clenched, sunglasses sliding down her nose. The headline made my breath catch. Prominent interior designer loses flagship client after public outburst. I scrolled. Victor Grant, a name everyone in Miami knew, had canceled his multi-million-dollar contract with her firm after she belittled his taste in front of his staff. According to witnesses, she called his vision tacky and compared his requests to a chain motel. Victor had responded by terminating the agreement on the spot. The article detailed how quickly word spread. Within 48 hours, other clients followed. Projects evaporated. One high-end hotel retracted their proposal, and a pair of luxury condo developers put their collaboration on hold. The comment section was merciless, and I could almost hear the sound of her empire cracking. Diane exhaled on the line. This is just the start. Did you see the second piece? I refreshed, and another headline popped up. Former employee files lawsuit against Parker Interiors. I read in silence. Emily Chen, who I remembered as one of Melissa's assistants, claimed she had been denied wages and forced to work overtime without pay. The lawsuit accused Melissa of retaliation and a toxic workplace. Photos showed Emily outside the courthouse with her lawyers smiling bravely, a stark contrast to the storm Melissa was facing. The article included testimonies from other former staff. They spoke of unpaid invoices, verbal abuse, promises never kept. Each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of her once glossy reputation. Her name is everywhere, Diane said quietly. And not in the way she wanted. I closed the news app and sipped my coffee. The bitterness matched the taste in my mouth, but it wasn't triumph I felt. It was something steadier, like the universe finally answering the imbalance I had carried for years. By the weekend, the collapse accelerated. A local news station ran a segment on the downfall of Parker Interiors. Reporters camped outside her office, catching footage of employees carrying boxes to their cars. Even the polished Parker Interior sign was taken down, the bolts left exposed like scars on the wall. I drove past once on my way back from meeting the contractors at the mansion. The parking lot was nearly empty, the front doors locked. A week ago, Melissa's voice had filled that space with commands and disdain. Now silence pressed against the glass. At home, the sound of hammers and saws filled the air as workers transformed the mansion's second floor into meeting rooms and therapy spaces. In the garden, a landscaper sketched plans for a meditation area beneath the banyan trees. Empower Women Hub was no longer an idea whispered over coffee with Diane. It was rising real and solid, brick by brick. Sometimes I stood at the top of the staircase watching the bustle below, remembering how invisible I had felt at that birthday dinner. How Melissa's words had cut deep, echoing through laughter at my expense. Now the rooms around me pulsed with purpose. Each wall carried a promise. One evening, as I painted a section of trim in the library myself, my phone vibrated again. Another alert. This time, it was financial news. Melissa Parker declares bankruptcy. I sank into one of the leather chairs and let the weight of it settle. Her company, once showcased in glossy magazines, was gone. Creditors lined up. Lawsuits multiplied. Former clients demanded restitution. I imagined her scrolling through the comments online the same way I once had after she mocked me. But now it was her turn to feel the sting of strangers, reducing her worth to failures and headlines. For years, she had laughed at the fact that I rented a shabby apartment at my choice to keep quiet rather than boast. Now I lived in a mansion reshaped into something greater than status, while she clung to the ruins of what greed and cruelty had built. I set the phone aside and looked out the tall windows to the pool where lights shimmered against the water. Workers' voices still drifted from the back garden. This place had become alive with possibility while her world shrank smaller every day. The symmetry was almost too sharp, too perfect, but I didn't question it. I simply let it stand. I rose from the chair, brushed the last streak of paint across the trim, and stepped back to admire the clean line forming along the wall. The house was changing just as I was. And somewhere across the city, Melissa's empire was falling brick by brick, undone, not by my hand, but by her own. I breathed in the quiet and knew the story was not finished yet. It was Diane who first told me she had run into my parents. She had stopped at the Coconut Grove Farmers Market on a Saturday morning planning only to pick up tomatoes and fresh basil, but came back with a story that stayed with me all week. I was sitting across from her at the cafe near my mansion, the one with rattan chairs and blue awnings that caught the sea breeze, when she set her basket down and sighed. She told me she had seen Linda and Charles wandering slowly past the flower stalls. She said they looked smaller than she remembered, as if the air itself had pressed down on them. Their clothes were neat but tired, their eyes ringed in shadows. They had stopped her near the bread stand, voices low, asking how I was. I stirred cream into my coffee, watching the swirl fade. Diane's words fell softly, but they carried weight. She said my mother's hands trembled as she clutched her bag, her face pale in the sunlight. My father stood beside her, his shoulders bent, his usual bark replaced by silence. They had confessed almost in unison that putting their trust in Melissa had been a mistake. That they thought they were investing in the stronger child, the one who would keep their name polished. Instead, they were left with lawsuits and shame. I did not answer right away. My spoon rested against the rim of the cup as the breeze lifted strands of my hair. Diane leaned closer, saying they seemed adrift, like people who had misplaced not just money or reputation but a sense of themselves. That night alone in my room, I lay awake with her words repeating in my mind. I remembered how often I had longed for a look of approval from them when I was young. A pat on the shoulder after a school recital, a smile at my report card, anything that told me I was more than a shadow standing next to Melissa's glow. Instead, it had always been her name on their lips, her photo on the mantel, her triumph celebrated as if mine did not exist. I rolled onto my side and let the memories rise. The dinners where my father quizzed her on business ideas and brushed past me when I tried to speak. The afternoons when my mother praised Melissa's style and sighed at my plain clothes. I had spent years hoping one day they would see me just as I was, without comparison. That hope had been a chain I carried longer than I realized. Now with Diane's story, I felt the chain loosen. Their regret was real perhaps, but it no longer held me. I was not the little girl begging for notice. I was a woman who had built something on her own, something they could not take or dismiss. The next weekend, I drove past their house in Coral Way, the one that once buzzed with parties and Melissa's laughter echoing through the halls. The driveway was empty. Curtains hung heavy and closed. A single light burned dimly in the foyer, but the windows looked tired, the garden untrimmed. It was the same house I had once felt invisible in, but now it looked like a hollow shell. I parked down the street and sat for a while, hands resting on the steering wheel. I imagined them inside, moving through quiet rooms that used to burst with noise, the silence pressing in as memories of Melissa's collapse grew heavier. I could almost see my mother at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched tea, my father staring at the wall instead of barking instructions. They had built their world around Melissa, and when it cracked, they were left in the ruins. For a moment, I wondered if I should go knock step into the foyer and let them see me standing there strong and whole. But the thought faded as quickly as it came. It was not my place to heal what they had chosen to break. I drove back to the mansion as dusk settled, the sky painted with streaks of rose and gold. The gates opened and I pulled in, the sound of gravel crunching under my tires grounding me. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Workers had finished the library shelves and the soft glow of sconces lit the walls. It was a house filled not with ghosts of old approval but with possibility. Later, as I stood on the balcony overlooking the garden, I let the night wrap around me. I thought of the girl I once was, aching for her parents' pride, twisting herself into silence so Melissa could shine brighter. I thought of the woman I had become, the one who no longer needed their recognition. The difference was not in what they had lost, but in what I had found. Their regret was theirs to carry. My freedom was mine. I rested my hands on the railing and closed my eyes. The air smelled of salt and jasmine, alive with promise. For the first time, I understood that I had truly stepped out of the shadows. I was no longer bound to their gaze or their silence. The night deepened around me, and I let it be. The morning of the opening felt alive before the sun had even climbed fully over the horizon. The gates of the mansion swung wide, and the once silent driveway now echoed with the shuffle of footsteps and the hum of voices. Cars parked along the street, women stepping out in pairs and small groups, some carrying babies, others clutching tote bags with notebooks tucked inside. A few looked hesitant, eyes darting around as if they were unsure they belonged. But the moment they passed under the archway and onto the lawn, I saw shoulders ease and smiles begin. Inside, the transformation of the house was complete. Where there had once been velvet curtains and dining tables set for show, there were now folding chairs, laptops lined in neat rows, and coffee stations buzzing with conversation. The library held shelves not just of novels but manuals on coding, financial literacy, and entrepreneurship. The ballroom where Melissa once dreamed of hosting fundraisers for herself was now lined with long tables covered in notebooks and whiteboards ready for brainstorming sessions. It no longer looked like a museum of wealth. It looked like a workshop of possibility. I moved among the women as they explored the rooms. A young single mother stood near the staircase rocking her infant while nervously looking at a flyer about small business loans. I touched her arm gently and told her she was in the right place. She smiled, shy but grateful. Across the hall, a group of women who had recently lost jobs during a corporate downsizing were already in a huddle comparing resumes and trading encouragement. In the garden, teenagers bent over tablets as a volunteer walked them through their first lines of code. The mansion breathed differently now. It was no longer echoing with the past but vibrating with a future being written in real time. Diane found me near the dining room, her eyes bright. She leaned in and whispered that she had not seen this much hope gathered under one roof in years. I nodded, unable to put into words how it felt to witness. All the fights, all the nights of doubt, every moment my family tried to paint me as small had led to this day. When the time came, I walked up the grand staircase slowly, each step carrying not just me but the story of every woman who had been told she was less. The crowd below hushed. Faces tilted upward, expectant, a sea of women of different ages and backgrounds, each carrying her own history of setbacks and resilience. I placed my hands on the balcony railing and began to speak. I told them that this house was never meant to be a monument to one person's name, that its true purpose was to hold many stories, not just mine. I said that independence was not selfishness, and that finding strength was not rebellion but survival. I reminded them that wealth could vanish, approval could be withdrawn, but knowledge and community were anchors that no one could take. As the words left me, I felt them root deeply into the room. A murmur of agreement rose, followed by clapping that swelled until it filled the hall like a heartbeat. Some women stood applauding with tears streaming down their faces. Others clutched each other's hands as though they had just been reminded they were not alone. Later, when the applause softened, workshops began. I walked through each room, pausing to listen. A volunteer explained credit building to a circle of young women, their pens scratching notes eagerly. In another space, a mentor walked a group through interview practice, challenging them to raise their voices with confidence. I watched a woman in her 50s who admitted she had never touched a computer before type her name onto a screen and laugh with pride when it appeared. The house was alive in a way it had never been. The chandeliers still sparkled above, but instead of reflecting isolation and vanity, they shone on collaboration, laughter, and determination. I realized in that moment that the mansion was no longer my escape from humiliation. It was now an engine of change. By late afternoon, the Florida sun spilled gold across the garden. The crowd gathered outside, plates of food in hand, children darting between chairs. I stood on the balcony again, not to give another speech, but simply to watch. Their voices rose like music, a rhythm of shared strength. And yet, standing there, my thoughts wandered briefly to Melissa and to my parents. I imagined their quiet house, the air heavy with regret and silence. Once I would have wished for them to see this, to acknowledge me, to finally say they were proud. Now I realized it no longer mattered. Their gaze had no hold here. What mattered was the laughter below me, the courage in those rooms, the women who would walk back into their lives carrying something stronger than approval, independence. The sun lowered, painting the sky in violet and rose. A cool breeze lifted the banners in the yard, and I felt an immense calm settle inside me. This was not just the end of one story. It was the beginning of hundreds more. I turned from the horizon and faced the women, once again, my voice steady. I told them that every woman here carried not just her own journey but the power to light the way for others. I said that this house was proof that no one had to remain in the shadows of someone else's success, that we each deserved to stand in the full light of our own. Independence, I reminded them, is not given, it is claimed. They applauded again, but this time it felt different. It was not for me. It was for themselves, for each other, for the recognition that their strength was already present, waiting only to be called forward. As twilight deepened, I stayed on the balcony, the sound of their voices drifting into the night air. The mansion glowed with light from every window, no longer a fortress but a beacon. I thought of the years when I had bent myself small, when I had believed that my family's approval defined my worth. Standing there now, I knew the truth. Independence is justice in its purest form. It is the unshakable foundation of a life lived on your own terms. And to you listening, I leave this. If you have walked through shadows, if you have ever been overlooked or underestimated, remember that your story can turn. Share it, speak it. Let it stand beside mine so others know they are not alone. Because strength multiplies when it is spoken aloud. This was my story, now I ask you to tell yours.